Hello, everyone, and welcome to Celebrating Cinema, a podcast for the love of cinema. I'm your host, Laura Gomons. If you're enjoying the show, we'd really appreciate it if you'd leave us a review and share it with a friend. It really helps other cinema lovers find us. Who gets to tell a story, and who gets to see themselves reflected on screen? Those questions lie at the heart of Ousmane Sembène's Black Girl, a film that transformed African cinema and continues to reshape the way we think about representation, identity, and power. As Odyssey Classics re-releases the film for its 60th anniversary, Filmmaker Kiriko Mechanicus is joined by filmmaker and archivist Djeneba Saccoh to explore why Black Girl remains every bit as radical today as it was in 1966. If you haven't already, we'd also recommend listening to our companion interview with Sembène's son, Hélène, where producer Elliot explores the filmmaker's extraordinary life and enduring legacy. Before becoming a filmmaker, Ousmane Sembène was a dock worker, trade union activist, and a novelist. But he believed cinema could reach audiences that literature never could. Film, he argued, could become the people's night school, a place where African audiences could see themselves, their histories, and their futures reflected on screen. His debut feature, Black Girl, follows Diouana, a young Senegalese woman who travels to France to work for a wealthy family, only to discover that the promises of opportunity conceal the lingering structures of colonial power. In telling her story, Sembène created not only one of the great films of African cinema, but a work that continues to ask who cinema serves and whose voices it leaves unheard. Here's Kiriko and Djeneba.
Hi, Djeneba.
Hello.
Thank you so much for being here. So we invited you today because you are a very big fan of Sembène, and then you have a history in film. You studied film, but now you work as a social worker and as a performer, which I think are all things that very much go into the thematics of what we're going to talk about today in this film. However, I want to first start off by asking you what the latest film is that you've watched.
Thank you for having me here, first of all. And the last film I watched is My Father's Shadow by Akinola Davis Jr.
Tell me.
I think it's also one of the best films I've seen in the last year, to be really honest.
Fantastic.
I was holding in my tears at the end so much. I went to the cinema by myself. I feel like after the film, I really took this feeling home as well, and it sat with me for quite some time. The film is just this day where a father takes his kids to Lagos to join him on his usual endeavors, I would say. And I feel like the kids get a chance to get to know the man behind the father, I would say. And also his political role, but also his friend's role and how he is at work. And they get to see a whole different version of the father that for them is more of an absent figure, but then they start to get to know him better, I would say, and it's very heart touching.
What was the feeling that stuck with you, that you left the cinema with?
I don't think I can put it into one emotion or one feeling. I think I was very moved and I was just like, wow, that's cinema. Honestly.
That's a feeling on itself, to be fair. Yeah. That's an emotion for sure.
Yeah.
Wow.
What is the last film you watched?
So I was sick in the past week, and that is my excuse to watch all the films that I want to watch, but also can watch, because when you're sick, you can't, go into things that are, that require you to think too much, let's say. So I watched a lot of American films. But the last film that I watched was 2 days ago. It's a film called To Die For by Gus Van Sant with Nicole Kidman. It's a fantastic film, I would say. It's very, very American cinema with a very young Joaquin Phoenix, of Nicole Kidman, who has this dream of being on television as a reporter or as a journalist or, I don't know, a weather girl. She just wants to be seen in that way. But she's also this crazy manipulative bitch who walks over everyone in order to achieve her dreams. And I don't know, she looks gorgeous. She has this dog which is kind of like the similar breed of dog that I have. So I recognized myself a little bit there. Not as a deceiving bitch, but as someone with a fluffy dog. And Nicole Kidman is just fantastic. I've been like rewatching some of the films that she's in lately, and I don't know, she does like, she embodies this sinister side of America, even though she's not American.
I'm curious.
Yeah, it's a really good film. Totally different, I think, from what you've seen, and totally different from what we're going to talk about today. Because today we're talking about Black Girl. Elliot told me like we're going to record an episode on Black Girl because it has this re-release by Odyssey Classics. And somehow in my mind, in the back of my mind, I remembered, yes, maybe we should talk about this film with Djeneba because this is her favorite film. And then I didn't even know why I knew that. Also, I don't necessarily know people's favorite films. And also, it's not as if we see each other that often, but your name just came up. So I texted you and I said, I'm sorry, but was Black Girl your favorite film? And you were like, yes, it is. It absolutely is. So yeah, that's why we invited you here. So I want to know, how did this film first come into your life and what has it done for your life?
So I've been thinking about it. Like, when was the first time I saw this film? Because I think I've seen it maybe more than 10 times already. Like, I cannot really recall when was the first time, but I do know that I think it was during COVID that I had a lot of time to watch films. And back then I didn't even study film. I was not really into filmmaking yet. I was just trying to spend time. And then I saw a picture of Safi Faye, also a Senegalese filmmaker. And then through going through her work and then going through more like filmmakers, I came to Sembène. And I do know that Black Girl was the first film I watched. And then through that, I went more and more into all of his films, actually. But after the first time I saw Black Girl specifically, I was like, again, this is cinema. And it also made me feel way more, how can I say? I was like, okay, so even though like growing up, there was not that much representation on TV and on like local broadcastings, there are a lot of African films and there is a lot of representation, but you really have to dig for it, I would say. I think seeing those films, I was like, oh, actually, maybe I also want to make films. So it kind of
changed your life.
Yeah,
profoundly.
It brought this spark, I would say.
Maybe for those who haven't seen it yet and who will hopefully soon see it in the cinema, could you tell us a little bit what the film is about?
For me, the film really is about Diouana, who is like she's the protagonist, she's the main character. And for me, the film is really about her inner world. And also because the whole film has this voiceover in which she is talking about what she feels and thinks, even though she's not always expressing it verbally. And then, okay, wait, what is it about? So basically, it's about Diouana, who lives in Senegal and who at that time, she's looking for a job. And then she starts working for a French family who live in Dakar as... she takes care of the kids, basically, while they are in Dakar. And then they ask her to come to France with them. Again, telling her to take care of the kids. But then when she actually comes to France, she realizes that she got scammed and that basically she's there to be a domestic worker, confined to the house. Although she had all these dreams of like seeing France and having a better life, quote unquote, but then realizing that they actually tricked her and used her. So it's actually also a very sad film with also very, very, very sad ending. And I think what's also very special about the film that it has this non-linear storytelling, because we don't start at the beginning of Diouana's journey. Like we go back and forth. And I think this also shows how her thoughts go and how her memory flows. And I think the non-linearity is also very special.
It's interesting what you say about her experiencing her inner world, because I think there's very few films that are so much turned inwards. I mean, you barely hear her speak, she only says like the few necessary practical things, and you hear her inner monologue, like her thoughts that she's saying to herself. Everything of her presence is so confined to minimal effect in real existence, if that makes sense. Like she only does the necessary movements. Like she does a little bit of self-expression by putting on heels, but like it immediately gets taken away from her. So you can really like see someone growing inside her own sorrow in a way, which is interesting to me. First of all, in how this opened your eyes to cinema, because in a way it's also the frame of this film itself. It's, I don't know how to say this, but it almost grows smaller as you watch the film. You know what I mean? It's very minimal in its form. It uses no crazy, like, I don't know, cinematic effects or anything. It's just the simplicity of life and how constricting that can be. It's interesting, you were saying earlier how Sembène used cinema as a means to have his message or his thoughts come across to a larger audience. And in a way, you can almost see it in the film that he has something more important to say than this idea of making, trying out this medium and seeing what it can do. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. I want to talk with you a little bit about the political symbolism and message that this film has, because it is an incredibly political film, but it's also very much a film about domestic life and about this girl just living her day to day. And how, what are the things in the film that stick with you most, in the sense that they showed you a truth or a story about Senegal or about this colonial history?
I think to answer the first one, that what really intrigued me about Sembène is that he was a writer first, and then La Noire, or like Black Girl, was a short story at first, and then he made a film out of it with really the goal also to reach more people, which you can also see in his later films, like for example Mandabi, that was actually the first film that was made in Wolof, in the Wolof language. So you can see throughout his work that he's trying really to reach the bigger audience and to really reach the people. He has also said in interviews himself that for him, Europe was not his center at all. He was really making films for an African audience, which also taps into his Pan-Africanism and his political views, his communism. So I think in that sense, already the creation of Black Girl in that time is kind of a political protest in itself.
100%.
And then also during that time, so it was like post-independence, but there's neo-colonialism. It's colonialism in a different jacket, basically. So then also there was this law, Le Décret Leval, where, so basically if you wanted to make a film in Senegal, you had to get approval from this like French institute who was really trying to control what was being made and what was not being made. Also because I think the French knew that cinema carries a revolutionary power, So then actually when Sembène handed in the script of Black Girl, it was rejected. It was rejected at first because I think they knew from the start when they read the script, like, okay, this is a revolutionary film and this is also political film opposing the dynamics and hegemonic structures at the time and the colonial system. So I think that already shows that even the making process of that film, and also when he wrote a short story that's actually based also on real life events, it's in itself a resistance, I think, already to make that film. Like he had to overcome so many obstacles to even make the film. And then I think in the film itself, I mean, there are many moments, but I think especially those gestures or like movements or choices she makes, like to resist also the situation. Like, for example, that she wears heels in the house while she's being used to like do all these things that was not supposed to be her job, like cleaning. She's in the kitchen, she's in the bathroom, she's also saying this in with this inner voice. And then she still wears her dress and her heels and her earrings. And I think that's a resistance, a protest in itself. And then when she doesn't have a name, but the madame, like the French woman, then tells her to take off the shoes, she just leaves them in the middle of the room. And she kind of matches then the energy of the madame, like, okay, you're treating me like this, so why should I then put them away nicely? You know, like she is maybe not verbally resisting, but she's very much resisting, I think, in her actions. Also the fact that she's not accepting the money, like the moment when she puts the money on the table and the apron on the table, and even her mom in the end also refuses the money. I think that's it's a big gesture symbol to say like, we don't care about the money, we value human life, the experience of life more. And I think that's also a way Sembène is showing like this capitalistic mindset in France as a contradiction to the sociological mindset, I think, in the African continent and in Senegal.
Yeah, and maybe also that the pain that colonialism has inflicted cannot be healed with money as a reparation or anything, or it almost shows how this French family that she works for are themselves trapped within this idea of thinking that money is a solution to a problem.
They really think that that's what's going to make her feel better, just to give her some money.
But especially the scene with the mother. So one thing that struck with me is that, so in the end, and this is a spoiler, so please skip this part if you're still gonna watch this film, the main character of the film, she commits suicide because of her desperation. And in attempt to sort of reconcile this situation, the French family, they go back to Dakar and they offer money to the mother of this girl. And she then refuses to take the money. And in a way, it's the second time that money is refused as a solution to a problem, which I find it also showed something in myself, how but maybe to some extent we as Europeans or as people are so confined to this idea that money is the only thing of value that we can offer to other people when a problem has occurred and that we want to resolve something. Yeah, I thought it was so powerful. Within the film, there's like a lot of exchanges of objects, of materials, also of the mask, which I think is a beautiful storyline in and of itself throughout the film. Yeah, do you want to talk about the mask?
Yeah. I think one of my favorite moments in the film is when Diouana is talking to the mask. So when she's in France and then the mask is hanging there on the wall.
Maybe we should start with who's the mask.
Oh, the mask.
Why is he here?
Okay.
Where did he come from?
So the mask actually belongs to this little boy. Not sure what his connection is to Diouana, but when they are in Senegal, she grabs the mask from him and she's like, yeah, well, I will give you something later or something. She just like takes it and then she hands it as a gift to the French family while she's going to work for them in Senegal to take care of the kids. So then when the family goes to France, they take the mask with them. So the mask makes this journey as well. I think like the same journey as Diouana is making. So then when she arrives in France, I feel like the mask is like almost this only piece she still has from home, but it's also not that clear anymore who the mask belongs to because she gave it as a gift. But then also towards the end of the film, she reclaims it. Like she reclaims the mask and she reclaims that part of herself that she had given to them, which is, I think, also very telling in itself. And then she has a fight actually with the madame over the mask. Like they're pulling the mask and they're like, no, it's mine, no, it's mine, no, it's mine. And I think that also says a lot about the value of something like that mask, which is not comparable between the two of them. Like for Diouana, that's a very different value than for the madame. I think for her it was just more this, it was just like decoration for her home, right? And then the mask, so the moment when Diouana is actually talking to the mask, she's like leaning towards the wall and she's saying something like, oh, back home they must think I'm living a great life here in France, but they don't know the truth. Like she's almost speaking towards her home and her family and her people through the mask. Mm-hmm. She's trying to reach them or to reach someone because she's so isolated and so alienated in that house, in that place. So the mask becomes almost the only listening ear that's around.
It becomes an object with so much value. And it's also interesting to see how the value changes depending on who's carrying the masks. So it becomes first a gesture of appreciation, then just like this art object hanging on the wall, but also I would say a symbol of like this exoticism that, you know, a lot of art lovers have with African art, to then actually becoming a person or maybe even a ghost of this past life that she had in Senegal. In the end of the film, the mask actually returns to Senegal because the owner of the house, the French man, he brings back the mask to be like, well, I guess this belongs to her and her family or whatever. And this kid runs off wearing this mask and he just like runs through the streets. And then, I don't know, for me, that is really a moment where you feel like, oh, there is a ghost of her and her story, and maybe also of the hardship that she experienced as the Senegalese woman who went to Europe and never returned. I don't know, to me, that you can really feel this past coming to life with this kid running through the streets, and I don't know, it's almost as if it's a reminder of a past that has existed.
Because he's also chasing the man at the end, the French man.
Yes,
with the mask.
That's true.
So it also feels like the French man can't escape history, or history will always follow him.
Yeah.
Also, that it's a kid. That's why it's so great, because it brings the future and the past together in that moment.
Yeah. I didn't know your mic was plugged in too. Hi there.
I also think this way of storytelling, using, for example, metaphors or symbols like the mask, is very home to like the oral tradition of storytelling in the African continent. And then specifically like the griot, like the jelly you have in West African countries, where there is a lot of hyperboles and metaphors and dreams and nonlinear storytelling as a tradition already. And I think also the mask is an example of that way of storytelling, I would say.
Mm-hmm. Because I was looking at the film, and then there was another film that you mentioned that I also love, which is Dahomey by Mati Diop, which is a film that came out, I don't know, a few years ago.
Yeah, not that long ago.
But I remember that it was also a film that came to my mind while I was rewatching Black Girl. I'm curious to know how you sort of see this film, how you see Black Girl as really maybe not a starting point, but very much as a beginning of a continuation of so many more films that have, you know, in a way interweaved similar stories or thematics.
I think Black Girl carries so much that it speaks about so many different things at once. I think, well, one very obvious and very important thing is like this, like there is this very strong female inner voice, and that she's a protagonist. I think that's something that, for example, it made me think of Jean Diomande by Chantal Akerman, like also the way the focus is on domestic work and the time of that and the way it's shot, and a lot of things reminded me of that as well, that I was like, oh, was she actually inspired by this film? I was kind of curious about that. And then this notion of like being a newcomer somewhere, like being an immigrant, being a first generation immigrant and arriving somewhere with a lot of hopes and dreams and then realizing that it's actually a scam. And I think that's still very relevant today. And then, for example, the mask, I think what we also see in Dahomey is that not only were resources uprooted and extracted, but also a lot of cultural, very valuable ways of being, but also objects and materials were also extracted and uprooted. So in a sense, the mask is also part of the diaspora in a way, because the mask for us, it carries a lot of spiritual value. It's not just a mask. There is things inside, you know. Mm-hmm. And I think in Dahomey you also see that when actually the artworks themselves, the objects themselves, they also get a voice, mm-hmm. this inner voice.
So maybe for those who haven't seen this film, Dahomey is a documentary about the return of, I believe, 23 objects of art, statues, including masks, I believe, that are being returned. I mean, it's like 23 out of like 3,000 or something, returned from a French museum back to Benin, right? Yeah. And you go through sort of the perspective of these objects and sort of their fear of coming back home and, you know, not being recognized anymore. I think like it's very much the perspective also of a second generation immigrant child of like, I don't recognize my home anymore. I don't know how they will receive me kind of thoughts. But a large part of the film is also students gathering of the university in Benin, where students talk about the significance and also the difficulties, their approval, appraisal, but also protest of these objects coming back home and what it means to them for Benin itself. And it is like this very, beautiful form of this spiritual journey of the life that the objects carry themselves and sort of the physical, political reality that they return home to. But it's, I don't know, this idea of objects containing life, I think is so foreign, European life in general, that I'm kind of struck by how immediately it's something that you understand when you watch these films. You know what I mean? Or maybe it's something that I'm also like vulnerable for or something, but it's something that you immediately believe. It's quite astonishing. I think both for Dahomey and also for Black Girl, the mask comes to life and I'm like, of course, all of history is contained within this mask. Like it could be no other way.
But I also think it has a very deep. Well, this is really my view on it, though. Like this is how I think. I feel like even the way when then specifically the African continent was colonized, and you know when there's like diamonds and golds and all these minerals are in the ground, and for example, when you look at the Benin Kingdom, like there are reports saying there were no front doors and there was gold in abundance, and it's just like this way of, I think in general, when you look at history, there's just a very different way of approaching material in general. And I think this birth of capitalism and then how colonialism happened and the way Europe and like the West in general approached these materials and took these materials as a means to like sell and gain profit is like 180 degrees difference from how it was. Yeah, you can sense that also in these films. I think that also I found that very interesting, if I remember correctly, when they were talking in Dahomey about, the students were talking about what to do with these objects. I think, at some point. Because, for example, do they actually belong in a museum? Because that's not what they were supposed to be used for. Like, maybe they were used in a ceremony, or maybe even in day-to-day life, you know, more as an interaction than being behind glass. And that's also very Western, to confine them then in a museum.
And how would you compare, so in Dahomey, the statues and masks are given a voice, and in Black Girl, Diouana, she doesn't have a voice even. Do you see this maybe a contrast in how they're represented maybe there?
Yeah, I think if I remember correctly, what I found really nice is in Dahomey, when the objects or the masks speak, they speak in a native African language, right? And I think that already says a lot. And I think also at some point the students talk about like, oh, why are we actually discussing all of this in French? Like, it's this language thing that's very interesting. I think that's the difference, I would say. And I think in Black Girl, I just actually think that her non-verbalism is more of a choice. Because at some point when they read her the letter, so at some point she receives a letter that is written by her mom, but then at some point she's like, no, my mom didn't write this or something. Like, she's also skeptical about it.
I thought of it as a protest.
Yeah.
I was like, she just doesn't want to move.
Yeah.
Because she just doesn't want to listen to orders or doesn't want to engage with these people. So therefore she does not speak. She does not engage. The only thing, everything seems so much like a protest. But I think the difference between the statues in Dahomey, or at least how I interpret it, and the protagonist in Black Girl, is that you can both hear their inner worlds, but it's also as if they are stuck within this confinement of this object that they're turned into, and therefore it cannot come to expression because their thoughts only remain to themselves. And in a way, Diouana, like, her suicide is in a way the ultimate refusal of the system that she lives in. But then in some way her voice and her tragedy and her history then move on in this mask that returns home. So in a way it's also maybe to some extent a similar voice. And maybe that's also why you feel that this returning of these objects that is now like a thing, at least here in Europe, carries so much weight, because it's all these voices and lives that have never been able to say a word or, you know, form a protest in any way in this continent, that it's all carried by these objects that have been confined in museums for centuries.
And sometimes I actually think that's maybe really a different conversation, but I still want to say it. I feel like when you look at the history of how, for example, these masks and all the things you see in museums here in Europe, I think when the colonizers took them with them, they actually knew the spiritual value of them. Because I feel like, for example, this, okay, maybe I'm it's a bit far-fetched, but to me it makes a lot of sense. If you think about how when they killed Lumumba, for example, and the way they made sure that he would not be buried as a whole, as a human, basically, as, you know, the way they colonized and the way they killed people and literally took parts and bits and spread it the same what they did, for example, with a mask, is because they do know the spiritual value of, like, having to be where your roots are, to have this power spiritually. I think they did it on purpose.
A theory about the devil.
Yeah. Yeah. Because actually, I think spirituality is a global thing. And I just think that in the West, we have been very much removed from it. So that's why a lot of people grasp to other cultures and places.
Yeah,
but spirituality is everywhere.
Yeah, actually, I wanted to say, we were talking earlier about, so like, the influence that this film has had on the African cinema, the representation of African cinema also, which is also a complicated weight to carry, and also a complicated responsibility, because I also thought like, oh yeah, I've seen like a number of Senegalese films, and then of course if you call Sembène like the father of African cinema, then he also becomes a symbol of a cinema of a whole continent, which I think is also, I think it's a general problem of how a lot of people look at Africa as this monolith of a culture or something. So maybe it's interesting to talk on what the influence and the legacy is of this film, West Africa, and maybe in Senegalese film, rather than, I don't know, what did he think of this?
Well, he always said that for him, what I mentioned earlier, that he really made his films for a larger audience, for the public, specifically people in the African continent. And he also wanted to reach people outside of Senegal. Mm-hmm. And I think what's very sad about this is that still now, a lot of his films are more known in, for example, France than in Senegal. Mm-hmm. Because still the distribution thing, where France still had a lot of the rights of distribution, and the fact that also during that time, and for example with le décret Laval and all these things, that there was still not like a situation in which you are completely free and autonomous in producing and distributing these films, right? So I think Sembène, his goal was to reach as many people as possible, especially also like the workers' class. He was also really making films about people other than the elite, I would say. So I think in general, I think we need more voices always.
Can you give us a few names?
Actually, I have to be really honest. After I watched this film, I decided I will not make films anymore, because I was like, this is cinema, and that's for me that. It's called Muso, I think.
Oh my God, how sad. Or like...
No, I was so like intrigued by this film that I was like, the ultimate cinema has been made.
Oi.
I'm serious. I was like, I don't want to make films anymore. Like, why would I even make more films? Like, I don't know.
Okay, talk about this film.
So this film, then Muso, it's Muso actually means a woman in Mandinka, also I think in Bambara language. And the story actually is very interesting. It's a story about a girl who actually cannot speak. She really cannot speak. I don't know the name for this in English.
Mute.
Yeah. And she experiences something very tragic. She experiences sexual assault, but she cannot speak about it. And then this film actually gives her, I would say, a voice in this. But then, this, you just have to see it. It's so good.
It sounds so intense.
It's a Malian film. I think the filmmaker is Souleymane Cissé, if I'm correct. But this film, it's really, really... I think also having spoken just now about Diouana having like this inner voice but not speaking that much, it also made me think of this film, then Muso, where the protagonist can actually not speak. Mm. It's from 1975. Yeah, Souleymane Cissé. And it's the first fiction film, long feature film in the Bambara language as well. So it's also quite of a... It's an important film.
Wow.
And I think also another filmmaker that's very much overlooked is Safi Faye. She has one film, I forgot the name. But in this film, it's also about a young girl. I think it's just in general very important that people know that these films have been made. Also, the film from Safi Faye is made also in 1996, so it's also a bit older. It's called Mosan.
I love also that like West Africa was ahead of Europe with making female protagonists.
Literally. It's so good. Like, yeah, Safi Faye, I remember seeing her picture. I don't know if you know this picture, but it's like her in front of this big camera. It's so iconic. And she's actually also an actress in Petit à Petit. It's a film by Jean Rouge. She's also a very important filmmaker. She's being called the mother of African cinema. I would say start with Black Girl.
It's an opening.
And then dig yourself further into also Sembène's oeuvre. There's a lot of his short films on YouTube, actually. And I just hope cinemas start showing these classics more. I feel like African cinema is really overlooked. Like, when I see the programs, I'm always sad that there is so little being shown by African filmmakers. And also, like, going to film school and talking to people who are into cinema, but then they haven't seen a single film that comes out of the African continent makes me very, very sad.
Yeah.
Because also what I mentioned about, like, the oral storytelling tradition. And I think, to be honest, Africans are so good in telling stories. Like, the way we always use metaphors, you know, like, I don't know if you've noticed, but whenever I speak with my family, it's just only metaphors, and the way things are being put into words or the way we use symbolism to say something, I think storytelling-wise is very interesting and very unique.
Let's begin with Black Girl as an opening for this audience, but everyone, for those who are not familiar with African cinema, and start from there. We're going to list all the films that you just mentioned in the show notes. Yeah, thank you so much.
Thanks so much for listening. If you'd like to discover Black Girl for the first time or experience it again on the big screen, you'll find tickets in the show notes. Next week, Kiriko is joined by film programmer Alicia Bergamelli to explore camp, cult, and queer cinema, asking why some of the films we cherish most began life as failures, scandals, or critical disasters, and how films can be shaped and changed by the history that unfolds from its release. We'll see you next week.
Stay connected with us at Celebrating Cinema and Lab by following @Lab111 on Instagram and Letterboxd. Do you love what we do? Support us by leaving a review on your favorite podcast platform. It really helps us climb the ranks of the podcast charts. This was a Lab 111 production, edited and produced by Elliot Bloom, and co-produced by myself, Laura Romans. Music comes from Hugo Emertsal, and the artwork is by Studio FFF.